Hello and welcome to the TF1 show. I'm your host, Tinus, and today we will spend the next half hour or so unpacking what was quite a fascinating first 3 days of winter testing. Now, there has been lots of intrigue and fun developments, even though I guess it's still the first week, which means that the amount of meaning we can glean from these times are quite limited. But perhaps, whatever, it's still fun to speculate. So let's get straight into it. And I'll do this analysis, if you can call it that. Analysis is maybe too much of a compliment for what I'm going to be doing. But let's start with Mercedes, the defending world champions. Now, I think the first thing that we can say about them is the fact that it's complete night and day from what we saw last year during winter testing, where firstly last year they pitched up with a sort of a spec A car that they signed off the previous November, just basically to baseline systems and to get an idea of overall reliability. And then they only really sent their final product, or not even their final product, but the actual fundamental car design that they're going to be using during the second week of testing. Now, Mercedes has come out this year and said they're not doing that again. The regulations are pretty much exactly the same as last year, so there's no need for them to sort of take that type of gamble. So they came out with pretty much, I think, almost a finished product. If you think about what we're going to be seeing in Melbourne, but obviously with a few bits that are still going to be on the way, as is the trend with these top teams, especially over the last couple of years. Now, I guess let's maybe start with the big newsmaker for Mercedes specifically. And this was, the DAS system that they introduced on the second day of testing. Now, people were taking shuddery breaths. Helmut Marko was nearest makes no difference, close to a heart attack. I was so excited when I saw whatever was happening. Didn't really know at first what was going on. When Hamilton was pulling out his steer wheel and putting it back again, I thought, is it like a reliability type test that they're doing, a safety test? I actually don't know what was going on, but then all was revealed a bit later on in the day when Hamilton and James Allison did a bit of a press conference. And ever since then, we've been uncovering more and more hypotheses, more and more theories about exactly how the system would be working, the potential benefits of this DAS system. But let's start from the beginning. So DAS stands for dual access steering, if I'm not mistaken. And essentially as James Allison explained, this is basically steering that can move in more than one plane. In other words, it can go from left to right, but now it can also go backwards and forwards, as we saw on that onboard shot of Hamilton. Now, the benefits of this new steering system that Mercedes introduced aren't immediately clear, but the majority of the paddock is now sort of in agreement that, and after looking at the videos more carefully, you can see the toe of the front wheels changing when Hamilton pulls in the steering wheel. Now, for those of you who don't know what toe is, it basically describes the direction that the front wheels are pointing in, when you're looking at the car from, let's say, the driver's perspective. So, for example, most Formula One cars will have what you would call a slight toe out. So in other words, the front wheels essentially form a slight V, if you can call it that. If you sit in the cockpit, the front wheels, you can essentially draw a bit of a V, in between the front wheels. And then obviously if you reduce your toe, you're essentially straightening out your front wheels, which mean they're effectively parallel to each other. And I think that's what Mercedes' trick is essentially, with this new innovation, is to be able to change the toe of the tires, while actually driving around the circuit. Now you might ask yourselves, now Tinus, what benefit does this have? And I'll be the first to say that there are a couple of theories and a couple of ideas as to what advantage Mercedes can gain from this. But actually nobody has really, let's say, come to a final conclusion yet, and Mercedes has been very tight-lipped in actually explaining what the main purpose of these of this new system is going to be. So the majority of people in the paddock is basically under the impression that changing the toe of your front wheels can help with tire management, where if you are running the wheels directly or exactly parallel to each other on the straights, that will reduce the overheating of the tires and also the just general wear and tear of the tires, which obviously means that your tires will last a bit longer. Some people also speculate that it actually reduces the drag of the car itself, which means that there's some straight line speed advantages that could be gained from this new system. But all I can say is that it's absolutely fabulous to see a team like Mercedes, especially a team that's now won the World Championship 6 times in a row, for them to come and still push the boundaries and still be the ones to really innovate and raise everybody's eyebrows in, even during testing. And I just think it's fantastic, the fact that just the uproar around what's happened, the amount of media interest, the intrigue that this new system caused, the fact that all of the rival teams are sort of sitting there slack-jawed and wide-eyed. Nobody really knows what to make of all of this. So, nobody's been as surprised since, ever since, I can't think of a time that anybody has been this surprised when they saw a bit of a trick in the car. Maybe when Pastor Maldonado won a Grand Prix or something, but yeah, I think it's incredible that Mercedes were just able to pull something off. Whether this actually has this big of a benefit, I can't tell you. I guess we'll see in Melbourne potentially. Whether it's legal, again, from the sounds of things, the FIA has been involved with this whole development process since the beginning. So in principle, it sounds like the FIA is comfortable that this would be legal, even though they then issued a directive or changed the regulations for 2021 for this to now become not legal next year. So that effectively puts the rival teams in a bit of a catch-22, where Mercedes has obviously already done the development work, so they have this tool at their disposal, whereas the other teams would now have to go and put in the development work if they wanted to run a similar system, only for that development work being useful to for 6 months maybe, and then it's outlawed again. So I think it's going to be a very hard decision for teams like Red Bull and Ferrari and the midfielders, for them to decide whether they're actually going to try and develop their own version of this. And I guess, that decision will be made or be made more clear when we see the size of the benefit that Mercedes will get from this new system. But, I think, let's keep our eyes open for more DAS related intrigue in the next week of testing, and see if they are going to reveal a bit more information about how they are planning to potentially use this to their advantage. Now, in general, I think we can say that Mercedes is looking incredibly good. They were basically the fastest car throughout the 3 sessions in terms of lap time. Now, we can all look back to 365 days ago, where Ferrari was the outright fastest team over these couple of days of testing, and we all know how that went. But what I do find interesting with Mercedes, and you can see, if you look at the onboards, that they have worked on a bit more stability in the car. Sometimes last year the car tended to be quite lively, tended to be quite unpredictable, I guess, and a bit of a handful, where, from first impressions, when you look at the car this year, it looks to be a lot more stable, a lot less on the edge, which I guess is a good thing. I think Mercedes seems to be feeling a lot better about their chances and about their progress this year compared to last year as well. Last year they were obviously quite down in the dumps, and this year, they posted a video where James Allison basically put the car on display and explained all of the interesting fun areas that they made improvements on, and basically spoke about how much more power the engine has and how they were able to optimize so many different areas of the car, and how aggressive they went with their approach during the car. They ran the most laps over the last couple of days of testing, so they have also gathered the most data. They barely had any reliability issues except for a slight issue at the end of Bottas's session the one afternoon, but that didn't seem to stop them. They just kept on marching ahead. So I think on balance, Mercedes is looking incredibly strong. probably the strongest team at the moment, but you never know what the other teams are going to bring in terms of updates or in terms of progress. So let's hold out till next week to see if this continues. Now, I think the next best team will probably have to be Red Bull from what we've seen over the last couple of days. Now, a lot of the, pundits and commentators at the Barcelona track came out and said that, especially during the turn 1, 2, 3 complex on the Catalunya track, the Red Bull was the one that looked the best. And a lot of people feel that the Red Bull maybe have a lot more pace inside that car than what they're showing at the moment. And I tend to agree. I think if you just watch, the sort of comments from Verstappen and some of the other senior people in the team, they seem to be very smug and satisfied with what they're doing and their progress. So I think we can expect Red Bull to come out and maybe surprise a couple of people next week, or maybe even only in Melbourne. It's also rumored that they're going to bring a lot of updates and new parts to the car next week in order to potentially help their cause. I guess it's going to be interesting to see what innovations they come up with. Similar to Mercedes, Red Bull has done some quite interesting work on the rear suspension especially. I'm obviously not a mechanical engineer, so in terms of explaining the kinematics and everything around that, I'm not your man. There are some very, very interesting YouTube channels that you can go and watch if you want to learn more information about exactly how these new suspension systems work. But Red Bull and Mercedes has done a lot of work on those suspension, all of the different components of the suspension in order to open up a new path of development for the rear aerodynamics specifically. So I think we're probably going to see these cars just become more and more quick as the season progresses, because I think they've done a lot of work in not maybe initially putting on all of the downforce or all of the tricks, but to open up these avenues for them to really develop over the season. So Red Bull and Max Verstappen, I think they're going to be a team to watch out for over the season. Let's see if they show their hand a bit more over the coming week. Now, if we're talking about teams that aren't really showing their hand, we're going to have to maybe make a pit stop and excuse the pun at Ferrari, because Ferrari has been taking it extremely slowly over the first couple of days of testing. They saying that, after being so badly burnt last year, they are very much taking their time to properly understand their car and to make sure that they explore all possible setup avenues that this SF1000 can offer them. So they've been tootling around with their, on their lowest engine mode, not really showing any form of lap time. It's been very much behind the scenes type work from Ferrari over the first couple of days. Difficult for any of us to really get an idea or get a sense of where Ferrari is in the pecking order. Obviously, they are way down the time screens at the moment, just because they haven't seemed to make any effort to actually go quickly around the track yet. But and then to compound all of this, Mattia Binotto came out on Friday and he said, they're not as fast as they want to be. They think that they are behind the Mercedes and Red Bull, so that there's lots of work to do. Sebastian Vettel's face also wasn't, that much to write home about. He was pretty circumspect in his assessment of where the car is at. He said some things are better and some things are the same. Now, if that isn't a slogan that can be on Ferrari's gravestone one day, then I don't know what is. Some things are better, but some things are the same. And I think that's so poetic from the Ferrari team, and it's so applicable, I feel, to that team as well. But anyway, I digress. So, it's difficult to say at the moment, I think, in conclusion, exactly how fast Ferrari is. I think they're probably not at Mercedes' level, but I also don't think they're as far off as people think they are. Some eagle-eyed journalists had a bit of a look at Sebastian Vettel's long-run pace on Friday to get an idea of how that compares to the similar things that Mercedes and Red Bull did on Thursday. And surprisingly, it was very, very similar to the times that Hamilton and Verstappen did. So there might just be a bit of hope for the Ferrari team. And I personally hope that they can also mix it with the other two, because a 6-way fight, Melbourne would just be so fantastic. And, let's hope that'll be the case. Now let's move swiftly along to the midfield, where we can maybe talk about, McLaren first, since they were the next best team in the 2019 championships. Now, similar to Ferrari, McLaren had quite a quiet first 3 days of testing, where it seems that they sent sort of a basic framework of their car to just do the reliability testing, do the systems testing, get a nice baseline of what the car should be doing, get a good understanding of the car itself. And from what I can tell, they've basically succeeded in that mission. They've done, I think, almost the most after Mercedes amount of laps. Maybe only Mercedes and Red Bull did more than McLaren. They gathered a lot of data. Apparently they're bringing lots of new upgrades and things for the next tests. So I think McLaren is silently going about their business, not really bothering anyone yet. And, especially after some of the headlines that some of the other, midfield teams made, I think it's going to be interesting to see if McLaren bolts on all of the bits to their car, how they actually stack up to the rest. Because there was another bit of controversy, with Racing Point this week, when they pitched up, the first day of testing and the car rolled out of the garage, and it basically looked like the Mercedes from last year's championship. So much so that even I, a non-aerodynamicist and a non-engineer, was able to immediately pick up the similarities and actually say, you know what, everything, especially from the front, looks just like the Mercedes from last year. And then they came out and said, you know what, good spot. That's exactly what they aim to go out and do. They said they get their components from Mercedes, the engine and the gearbox, and the sort of the mounting points for the suspension to the gearbox. And they just thought to themselves, why would, they not optimize the fact that they get all of these parts from Mercedes and not sort of follow this, the similar approach to what Mercedes is taking with their car design philosophy. And they basically took some tracing paper and some pictures from the Mercedes car from last year and, drew out their front wing quite nicely. And especially the front wing and the side pods look remarkably similar to the car from last year. And, quite happily for them, it turned out that the car seemed to have quite a bit of pace. Sergio Perez went around quite quickly, in a couple of the sessions. He was quite high up the timing screens. The team seemed to be very satisfied with their progress. And obviously, the guys at McLaren and Renault were quite unhappy with this new development and the degree of similarities between the Mercedes from last year and the Racing Point, just because they feel that it's potentially unfair for these teams to get these components from the big teams and to then be able to design very similar principles and approaches to what the big teams have. Racing Point isn't the only one that does this. AlphaTauri, don't know how I should pronounce it. Let's go with AlphaTauri. They obviously get a lot of parts from their parent or their brother team in Red Bull. And Haas has been very much in the news over the last couple of years for all of the components that they got from Ferrari. But nevertheless, it's within the rules. So Racing Point, I think what they've done makes a lot of sense. I mean, why not optimize your chances to have a good package, and why not use the ideas that the out and out fastest team had last year? So, it's going to be interesting to see if the Racing Point can translate this into actual race performances, whether they can challenge for a podium here or there, how they stack up against the McLaren. That seems to also have been improved a lot from my understanding. So yeah, interesting times, I think, for the pink team. That's just going to be Racing Point for one more year. And then next year we're going to be, it's going to be Aston Martin Racing, which is, I think, also an exciting thought. Now, Renault, I have to say, I've been surprised by them, over the last couple of days, because firstly, I think their car in that black livery looks absolutely amazing. I just think that's the best looking car on the grid. And, given that how good the AlphaTauri looks, and even the Williams also looks amazing, I think all of the cars this year stand out standout liveries, maybe except for the Red Bull. I just feel the Red Bull livery is quite generic, but again, I'm getting off track. So let's talk about Renault and the fact that they brought a new slimmed down nose. So for those people that want to compare last year's Renault to this year's Renault, you'll see the nose this year has been on a diet of celery sticks and lemon water, and it's a much slimmer nose, more in line with what we saw from Mercedes last year, and also now from Red Bull and McLaren this year. And initial impressions from the team is that things are actually going quite well. They've been pretty satisfied. The car looks a lot better on track than what it did last year. So I really do hope Renault can have a good season and a strong season, because we need another works team like Renault in Formula One. And if things aren't going to go well, I don't really see how long they're going to remain in the game. So, good on Renault. I hope that they can maintain their momentum. Esteban Ocon seems to have acclimatized himself quite well in the team. Daniel Ricciardo is, fooling around as always. So that's also exciting. And, can't wait to see what they come up with, for the next tests. Now, the next three teams, I'm going to just talk about generically, AlphaTauri, Alfa Romeo, and Haas, because, I don't know, they've definitely flown under the radar, but at least from my perspective, it seems that, Haas, they still seem to be sorting out some of the kinks from last year, where they are just running around the track trying to ensure that they don't have a repeat of the 2019 season. Alfa Romeo hasn't really lit up any timing screens except for one lap that Kimi Raikkonen did. AlphaTauri as well, they seem pretty content with their testing performance, but nothing really too interesting to comment on them. So hopefully maybe next week we'll have a better idea of the pecking order between those three teams, because I think they might be slightly behind the McLaren and the Racing Point and the Renault. But again, stranger things have happened, so let's see what happens there. Now, the last team that we need to talk about is Williams, and I think we just need to give them a round of applause for the fact, and I don't know if this is patronizing or if this is sort of demeaning, but they did such a good job to be where they are now and to actually appear to be at least running in along with the rest of the teams and not be 2 or 3 seconds behind all the time. They seem to have fixed some of the big issues that they had. George Russell seems a lot more positive when talking about this year's car. So I really and sincerely hope we can see Williams competing at least against, the Alphas, whether it's the AlphaTauri or the Alfa Romeo or the Haas or even amongst the McLarens and the Racing Points. But I do hope that Williams can do that. And I do hope that we can see George Russell come into his own a bit, because I do think he's sort of the missing puzzle piece. And when you look at the new generation, along with, Leclerc and Verstappen and Albon and Lando Norris and, even, what's that other guy's name? Esteban Ocon. Apologies. So I do think we want to see George Russell in amongst that as well. So yeah, congratulations, Williams. I hope you guys can keep it up and that you can also develop your car throughout the season, because that's obviously going to be the next trick, is to maintain this momentum and actually keep up the rate of development. Now, that's my views on the first couple of days of testing. If you guys disagree with me, please go and disagree with me on any social media channel that I have. I'll tell you guys a bit more about that a bit later on. But yeah, I think it's, my initial instinct is that it's going to be a very exciting season. The midfield, I think, has closed up quite a bit. And I don't know, my gut feel just also says that I think the midfield is going to be a bit closer to the top 3 teams this year. At least I really do hope so, because it would be amazing if we can see a McLaren or a Renault just, get in there in between the Red Bulls and the Ferraris and the Mercedes every now and again. If not, every race, but just every now and again, you want to see a bit of, flies in the ointment, if you can call it that. Now, let's maybe think about what we can expect from the next week of testing. I think we're going to see a lot more low fuel runs. At least I hope we do. I think especially Ferrari and Red Bull will probably start showing their true pace, because all of the teams will have to at least do that type of simulation once or twice in testing before they get to actual qualifying. where they would have to do it, for realsies, in Australia. So, we're definitely going to see a lot more low run performance. I think Mercedes has been the one team that's been doing a bit of that already this week. It's going to be interesting to see if Mercedes can improve a bit more, and how close Red Bull and Ferrari can get to Mercedes' times. And, I think the other thing that the next testing days will reveal is, more or less what the pecking order in the midfield is going to be. Because at the moment, it's like a big hot pot of confusion where you have McLaren, Racing Point, and Renault and AlphaTauri, and you don't really know how these all stack up against each other. Even the Haas could surprise, given that they had a good car last year, that it just weren't ever able to access its performance. So I think lots more to be revealed in the next part of winter testing. I'm just starting to get more and more excited for the second part of testing, and then for the Australian Grand Prix, because it's always a fascinating thing to see the teams rock up and to really for the first time see, where they stack up against each other. Right. And that's another episode of the TF1 show. Thank you so much for listening as always. And please leave a rating, a comment, or if you are feeling more generous than Mother Teresa, please hit the subscribe button. You can continue the conversation with me on my Twitter account, which is @TF1show, or on my Instagram page, which is @TheTF1show. Now we'll chat again soon, and hopefully you guys all enjoy the second part of testing. Bye.